Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. On today's show, U.S. military interventions. Our guest, Matthew Hoh, who was a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, has seen the horrors of the American wars, was a U.S. State Department and Pentagon official, was part of the U.S. occupation in Iraq, resigned over the war in Afghanistan, and now is on the advisory board of Veterans for Peace, who fight for peace and demilitarization both at home and abroad. Matt Hoh, warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me here.
Matt, what pushed you to resign and take that turn 180 degrees in your life?
It was my third time at war. I have been to Iraq twice, and this third time to Afghanistan, and this was now 2009. And I just could no longer go along with the lies of the war, as well as the lies I was telling myself. All the excuses that I allowed, that I offered to myself to keep going with the war, to go along with the killing and the suffering. I could no longer accept those. And so in 2009, after my third time, and after the Obama administration decided to escalate the war in Afghanistan, I said, I just can't do this any longer, and I broke with the war and resigned, and now here I am, still 9 years later, and unfortunately, and more to the point, the wars are still here, and we have seen more wars over the last decade, and as we're going to talk about here, and as the viewers know, potentially even more. So.
You were mentioning in one of the TV interview shows that you have done, and you mentioned that the U.S., that was your words, that U.S. was supporting death squads, that the U.S. supporting them in Central America, and there has been 16 coup d'etat that the U.S. was sponsoring or participating or endorsing in Latin America, and actually in Venezuela, there is at least an intent of a coup d'etat that are blaming the U.S. Related to that. What sort of the reaction that you have regarding the U.S. interventions in Latin America?
Well, not surprised. I mean, this goes back a couple hundred years to the Monroe Doctrine, when President Monroe said the United States is in charge of the Western Hemisphere and no European powers are going to come in and interfere. And that gave the United States basically carte blanche. And you saw it throughout the 19th century, culminating, say, with the seizure of Panama to build the Panama Canal. And then I was in the United States Marines. And the United States Marines were heavily involved in military operations throughout Central America, throughout, in between the First World War and the Second World War. And then, of course, throughout the period of time, even during the Vietnam War, we had troops going into places like the Dominican Republic, as well then the less heavy presence of all these coups. The coups in Guatemala, what happened in Chile, the support of Pinochet in Argentina, the coup in Brazil. I mean, we could be here all day going on about this. So it's nothing that is new. And the fact that the United States is in this position now, threatening Venezuela, should not be a surprise to anyone who studies history or understands what the American government has been like and is like.
And to remember that in the case of Venezuela, there is this claim of the U.S. that they decided that there was a fraudulent election, and they are claiming new, fair, and free elections. I want to read one of the things that you wrote regarding that. You said your experience in Afghanistan. Yeah. Your words: every Afghan election has been thoroughly fraudulent and riddled with vote rigging and ballot theft on a mass scale, you said. The last presidential election in 2014 was so crooked that an extra constitutional position of co-president was created to prevent a civil war erupting amongst the Afghan constituencies that supports the government, while in the most recent parliamentary election, more than 3 months ago, now the irregularities were so blatant that still has not been released the results. And then you conclude, Say, I personally witnessed the 2009 Afghan presidential election. Tens of thousands of US and NATO troops were rushed to Afghanistan prior to the election to ensure a free and fair contest. Free and fair contest is exactly what the US today are trying to provoke the excuse for a coup d'etat in Venezuela. Is that double standard? Is that hypocrisy?
Oh, it's absolute hypocrisy. I mean, what was interesting to me at the same time as when I was in Afghanistan and President Karzai was stealing the election in 2009, and we sent all these troops, tens of thousands of troops. When President Obama came into office, there were less than 30,000 troops in Afghanistan. He brought that number up to 100,000 American troops, plus 30 to 40,000 European troops, plus another 100,000 contractors, to support the supposed free and fair, or the democratically elected government of Afghanistan. At the same time, we were opposing what was occurring in Iran and threatening Iran because in 2009 we claimed their elections were fraudulent. And these two countries share a border. And this hypocrisy extends throughout the world and has extended, throughout history. I mean, you can make countless examples or find countless examples of where the United States was claiming it was fighting for freedom or fighting for democracy, and it simply was not the case. First World War, we were supporting one set of monarchies against another set. I mean, so it is well imbued in American foreign policy to say one thing and to do quite the other, or to be duplicitous.
And you were also mentioning that the generals in the U.S., you said, they believe that there are sort of lieutenants to take care of the peace and democracy, and in doing so, justify war, and that has been, you say words more or less, you say, and that has been the case since the inception of this country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this goes back to, if you look at what happened to the Native Americans, if you look what happened to African Americans, to the expansion of the United States into the Caribbean, seizing Cuba and Puerto Rico, then seizing Hawaii, seizing the Philippines. If you look at how the United States forced Japan to open up in the 1850s, we did the same thing to Korea in the 1880s. So this notion that the United States has been an isolationist nation in its past or has had the best of intentions, there are example after example of the United States saying what we are doing is helping people, saying that we are providing freedom to them, but at the same time killing them in mass numbers, primarily for economic benefit. The Native Americans in the United States were nearly exterminated. More than 90% of them were killed. It was genocide. And this was strictly to seize their land, strictly for the economic benefits of the land, of the natural resources. And then once we defeated the final Native American tribe in, I think it was 1890, by 1893, we were staging a coup in Hawaii and taking over Hawaii. By 1898, we were taking over Cuba and the Philippines. I mean, and this goes on and on and on. Now here we are in 2019 talking about Venezuela. Yeah.
And you were mentioning that this is, talking about war, this is a bipartisan war machine.
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. The full-throttled support of U.S. military interventions abroad by both the Republican and the Democratic Party is it's similar to the idea that we have one party in this country that both parties are the party of what you could call the war machine, and you have seen this over and over again. One with just the massive spending on the U.S. military. We are decreasing spending and have been decreasing spending on all kinds of social services, on research, on science, on our education, on health care, but spending for the military, for the intelligence services, for our nuclear weapons, it just keeps going up and up and up, and it gets voted overwhelmingly. There is no question at all about what we are doing abroad. There is never any questioning about what our troops are doing, conducting combat operations in 14 different countries around the world right now. Today, we more than likely drop bombs in 7 different countries around the world, killing and wounding scores of people. And there is nothing but bipartisan agreement in the U.S. Congress not to talk about the wars.
So the ones who said that in reality this war machine, this military industry, is the backbone of a prosperous U.S. economy, are they right?
No, they're not right. The amount of money we spend on the U.S. military could very well be used for other purposes, and there have been many studies that have shown, I can point to ones from Rutgers University or University of Massachusetts at Amherst, that show that for every dollar you spend on the military, in nearly every other segment of the economy, transportation, healthcare, building bridges, schools, whatever, that produces more jobs. Spending money on the military is the worst way to stimulate the economy because so few benefit.
We're surprised also, if you see it, the U.S. from other parts of the world, including Latin America, that the President Trump was ordering U.S. soldiers to the border with Mexico to, quote unquote, fight against what? Migrants seeking asylum? What do you think?
Well, if you study political science, and I remember from college, you get taught the international policy, your foreign policy is always a reflection of your domestic politics. And that's exactly what President Trump was doing, sending U.S. military soldiers, forces to the border with Mexico was nothing more than to get his political base excited. There is and has been and always will be, I believe, in the United States, a racism and a xenophobia present in large elements of the population. And many of those elements voted for President Trump, and that's where he finds a lot of his support. So by sending soldiers to the Mexican border, he's being tough on those brown people who are going to come here and evade us, bring their drugs, rape our daughters, all these typical racist, xenophobic base accusations that of course are not true, but tie into people's fears and insecurities.
And also regarding Syria, your words, the U.S. were managing and funneling money to and logistics to supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. So when you're watching here, you say ISIS is a boogeyman. Yeah. They are one of the worst terrorist groups. And you were mentioning that at that point the U.S. were funneling and financing these quote-unquote terrorists?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, ISIS wouldn't be created if not for the invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. But what happens after ISIS, or Al-Qaeda in Iraq as it was called at that point, is defeated, it moves into Syria. The Syrian civil war begins. A lot of that can be traced to the United States government's support for those opposing Assad. Now, what we do, what the United States...
I'm sorry, they were saying that was the moderate opposition.
The moderate opposition, exactly. So via Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, we support these moderate oppositions, these moderate rebels, who really are either allies with groups like Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, or actually are Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. And we did this for years. And this is best expressed and best understood through leaked documents from the Pentagon that talk about this, that worry about this. And in my case, I remember in the spring of 2012, a friend of mine who was in charge for the Defense Intelligence Agency for Iraq, we met in a bar, and he was very upset and very concerned about this because we were doing exactly that. We were giving weapons and money and equipment, trucks or radios or whatever, to the very people that compose or ally themselves with the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. And so, of course, what happens is the United States military and government thinks that we can keep this confined just to the Syrian side and use them to overthrow Assad. But that line, that invisible line in the desert there divides Syria and Iraq, they won't cross over that for some reason. And they won't use those things to attack the Iraqi government, which of course in 2014, and actually began earlier than that, 2013 really, they do. And Mosul, and what we've seen now as a consequence of that is the destruction of every Sunni city in the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys, west and north of Baghdad, and just hundreds of thousands of people killed, wounded, missing, have lost their homes. Just an epic scale of disaster there, brought about by American bombs because of our decision to support these groups, and of course of our decision to invade in 2003 in the first place.
One of the issues also that you're mentioning is the opioid crisis here in the U.S., and you said you've been in Afghanistan and you have witnessed that. You say that the West there has increased the production of on the cultivation of puppies that they produce the opioid, and you say it's no coincidence that increase of the production there and the increase of the conversion here.
Yeah, there's none. And if you look and see what our United States Drug Enforcement Agency says about this, they're very scant. They're very limited in what they're commenting on it is, and they throw out specious statements. While the Canadians are clear that their heroin, their opioid problem, much of it has to do with Afghanistan, the United States government refuses to admit that. They claim that all this is coming from either Mexico or Colombia or other parts of South America, which is just impossible. If you look at the Drug Enforcement Agency's own reports, the acreage, the land that is under cultivation in Mexico and in South America is not enough to supply all these opioids, all this heroin that is flooding American streets, just as it's flooding Russian streets and flooding European streets. And the Afghans, the saddest part of all this is that the Afghans have a awful drug problem themselves. There are well over 1 million Afghans in a population, so where that are just devastated with drug addiction. So it's an incredibly sad story, incredibly tragic story, but also a very criminal one. And the connection between the U.S. government and drugs is well understood, whether you want to talk about the connection between drugs and the Contras in Nicaragua in the 1980s, or the connection with drugs in Vietnam and Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. You could talk about drugs with the mafia in Europe after World War II in order to help defeat the communists there with using the drug mafia to keep control of the ports in southern France and in Italy. I mean, there's a connection between U.S. government and drug lords that goes back to China and the opium trade, 125 years ago. So this is nothing new again.
You have said, and again your words, a lot of us have quote-unquote moral injuries. That is a fancy way to say guilt. You say, we went there to a war zone, we violated who we were by taking part in these occupations, by taking part of these murders. We grew up thinking that we were going to be the guys with the white hat, and we are not. We are the guys with the black hats. And then you say, the guilt is what we believe is the biggest driver of veterans' suicide, that moral injury, that transgression, you can't get out blood out of our hands.
That's right.
That's really the injury that most of you guys that have been in war zones still suffer or go through.
Yeah, absolutely, because we brought hell to people. I mean, we brought absolute hell to people. And regarding Venezuela, that's what people should be expecting in Venezuela if the United States launches a coup and invades. It will be hell. For veterans like myself who come back and you come to grips with what you took part in, so about 4,500 American soldiers have been killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Based on U.S. government numbers, about 9,000 Iraq and Afghan returning soldiers have killed themselves. So twice as many
More than 20 a day.
Yeah, exactly. But 20 a day total for all veterans. But for Iraq and Afghan war veterans, it's about 1.5 to 2 a day. But that number is just going to keep going up, and it's never going to end. That's the thing. World War II veterans kill themselves at a rate 4 times higher than men and women their own age who didn't go to war.
Because of that guilt.
Because of that guilt. Because it is absolute hell what we brought to people and what we took part in. And that's why these conversations in the United States about Venezuela are so important. For the rest of the world also, it's so important, because the hell that we brought to Iraq and to Afghanistan, to Libya, that is a hell that we will bring to Venezuela very easily and without much thought here in the United States.
What your organization, Veterans for Peace, do to help all that?
Well, we do a number of things. The purpose of Veterans for Peace is to educate the population about the true costs of war. So we speak very openly about our experiences so that those experiences aren't replicated or repeated. What we also do is we also send out delegations. I've been on delegations to Palestine, to Okinawa. I've been on delegations in the United States here to stand with people with the African American community in Charlottesville, to stand with the Native American community in Standing Rock. We do these delegations in order to show our solidarity with those who are standing up against oppression, who are standing up against militarization, who are standing up against occupation. And so that's the main purpose of Veterans for Peace, to educate about the true costs of war, and then to do something to make up for what we did by serving the American military and by serving the American empire.
And in the case, for example, of the soldiers that went to the border with Mexico, you were suggesting to disobey.
Exactly. Disobey. Listen to your conscience. Listen to your heart. Do what... Look, most people join the U.S. military because they want to do the right thing. They're not bad people. And they believe that they'll be doing the right thing. They grew up on these myths and these narratives about what the United States stands for. And then they join the military and then they find out what the military in the United States actually stand for. Well, you're not the person that changed. You're still a good person. So listen to your heart, listen to your conscience, and do the right thing. And we try, it's very difficult to do that. It's very hard to do that. It requires a lot of courage. So we try and stand with them and help them make that choice to do that right thing, to listen to your conscience and listen to your heart.
Matthew Hoh, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jorge.